Hi, everybody. This is the file number 9 of the endocrine physiology. And in this part, I'm going to continue my discussion about the adrenal gland. You remember in the last file, I told you that adrenal gland is composed of two parts. One part was the adrenal medulla and then adrenal cortex. I told you about the functions and the hormones that are released from the adrenal medulla, and now I'm going to talk about the adrenal cortex. I told you that adrenal cortex is composed of three layers, and one of the layer was fasciculata layer, the most significant part. And the hormone that is released from this part is named as cortisol. Cortisol sometimes is named as stress hormone because it is the hormone that is regarded and is dealing with the stressful situation of the body. Sometimes we believe that this hormone may be a negative hormone for the body, but it is not true. This hormone is enabling us to protect ourselves against the stressful situations. Another hormone that was released from the adrenal cortex was from the reticularis layer, that is aldosterone, and finally we have the glomerular layer that is aldosterone, and then we have the reticularis layer that release the adrenal androgens. All these hormones that are released from the adrenal cortex are steroid hormone, as I told you, and therefore for these cells production of the steroid hormone is very, very important. They should be able to uptake cholesterol from the blood and then convert this cholesterol into the steroid hormone. In the zona fasciculata, I am starting with zona fasciculata, you can see that the receptor for LDL and receptor for HDL, that you know that they contain a large amount of cholesterol in the blood. The cell have receptor for LDL and HDL, and therefore they are able to uptake LDL into the cell and release the cholesterol as free cholesterol, FC. Cell is able to store this free cholesterol as a esterified form of cholesterol, and every time that it is needed, this storage of cholesterol will be used to produce new steroid hormones. In this process, the enzyme that esterify the cholesterol, the enzyme that hydrolyze the cholesterol ester, are important. Then free cholesterol inside the cell should be transferred into the mitochondria. You know that this transfer of cholesterol in the cytoplasmic fraction into the mitochondria may need some protein as carrier protein. We do not know about them, but it is logical to think that some proteins are involved in this process. I am passing this part, and then we follow the free cholesterol at the mitochondria. You can see that in the mitochondria, free cholesterol will be used and uptake by mitochondria, and then under some proteins such as steroidogenic acute regulatory protein, or STAR, and the enzymes that are very important, particularly one enzyme that is named as CYP11, the free cholesterol will be converted into pregnenolone, and pregnenolone will come back to the cytoplasm, and then the other process will take place to produce the final hormone. I'm not going to discuss about these details. I just show you the three layers of the adrenal cortex. Some steps are the same, are common. You can see that cholesterol is converted to pregnenolone in three layers. Then we have some pathways that is not common and is specific for each layers. I can say that the only factor that made the difference between the zona fasciculata and zona glomerulosa is the set of the enzyme that are expressed by those cells, but they are not expressed by these cells. Therefore, the final product may be different. And I told you that I'm not going to discuss about these details, but I want you to understand why we say that glomerulosa is able to produce aldosterone, because the enzymes needed for aldosterone are expressed, and why in the fasciculata layer cortisol will be the final product, because the set of enzymes are expressed there. In the zona fasciculata, therefore, the set of enzyme, cholesterol to pregnenolone, pregnenolone to progesterone, and progesterone finally to desoxycortisol and cortisol are expressed. And final product of the zona fasciculata will be cortisol, and the hormone is cortisol. Now, this cortisol is released. I will tell you that under the stressful situation, under the stimulation that comes through the hypothalamic area to the pituitary gland, and from pituitary gland to the adrenal cortex, cortisol will be released into the blood. But you know that cortisol is not a water-soluble molecule. It should be transported by some proteins as carriers. And for this purpose, the liver is releasing a protein named as corticosteroid binding globulin, or CBG. CBG or transcortin almost transport about 90% of the cortisol that we have in the blood. And the other 5 to 7% will be transferred by the action of common proteins such as albumin. The liver produces these proteins. Therefore, the liver has the capacity to affect the transporting of this cortisol in the blood. Also, liver has another function, and it is the place that cortisol is being inactivated and therefore cleared from the blood. The cortisol also is being inactivated by other cells in the metabolism of the cortisol. And several cells such as liver, adipose tissue, skin, CNS express one enzyme named as 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 2. And this enzyme is able to convert cortisol into cortisone. And you know that cortisone is inactive molecule. It is not active. It is not able to activate the receptor and therefore has no effect. This process will inactivate the cortisol. And therefore, each cell, such as adipose tissue, skin, brain, are able to protect themselves against the cortisol in the case that they do not need them. They are able to protect themselves. For example, a skin cell is able to reduce the level of cortisol inside its own cell because it do not need it. But this process is not one direction, one way. It is reversible. These cells, under the proper circumstances, they are able to express another enzyme from the same family, type 1 of the 11-beta HST. And this enzyme is able to convert cortisone into cortisol, convert back cortisone into cortisol. And when cortisol is again formed, it is able to function. In fact, I can say that skin, brain, adipose tissue, liver are able to uptake the cortisone, the inactive metabolite, and convert it into cortisol in the case that they need higher level of cortisol than the level that is available in the blood. For example, if imagine my skin is a little inflamed. These inflamed cells need more cortisol to combat the inflammatory process. Therefore, they are able to uptake the cortisone, convert it into cortisol, and therefore respond to their need independently of the cortisol that is released by the adrenal gland. This process of the conversion of cortisol into cortisone and then converting back into cortisol is named as cortisol shuttle. When cortisol reaches the cells, different cells, the cortisol is easily entering the cell. Inside the cell that have receptor for them, we have receptor for cortisol that is named as glucocorticoid receptor, or GR. They form a complex with the GR, and this complex will enter the cell and then enter the nucleus and then stimulate the expression of different type of genes that I will tell you that have different type of functions. Inside some cells, such as in the kidney, we have another type of these family of these receptor named as mineralocorticoid receptor. And you know that mineralocorticoid receptor is referring to the receptor for aldosterone. Cortisol has the tendency to bind to the mineralocorticoid receptor also, but with lower affinity. But you should know that the cortisol concentration is about hundreds of times higher than aldosterone, and this bring a problem. And this problem is this: how it is possible that glucocorticoids such as cortisol do not produce mineralocorticoid receptor activity. This is because of presence of the same enzyme that I told you here, the 11-beta hydroxyacetylate dehydrogenase type 2. In these cells, in fact, every time that cortisol enters the cell, immediately it will be inactivated into cortisone. Therefore, it do not produce side effect. It do not produce aldosterone effect because it is degraded, inactivated immediately. But in other cells, cortisol will enter the nucleus with the receptor and stimulate the process of formation of several other proteins or expression of several genes to produce the effect that I told you, that I will tell you. As I told you, cortisol is known for its role in the stress, and the axis that we have between the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and the adrenal, that is named as HPA axis, is known for its function in the dealing with stress. Therefore, cortisol is known as a stress hormone. In fact, every stress that reaches to the body, physical stress, emotional stress, metabolic stress, trauma, hypoglycemia, surgery, anesthesia, all these stress are able to stimulate the CRH neurons in the hypothalamus. And then hypothalamus will affect the pituitary gland to release a hormone named as ACTH. You remember I told you ACTH is a family member of POMC, pro-opiomelanocortin receptors, pro-opiomelanocortin proteins, and ACTH will affect the adrenal cortex to stimulate cortisol release. In this process, antidiuretic hormone also play a role, but CRH is the main regulator for ACTH control. And then ACTH itself and then cortisol are able to make the negative feedback, and by negative feedback inhibit the stimulatory signal that are coming down from the hypothalamus to the adrenal cortex. Now, this cortisol that is released in response to stress will protect body, For example, if we have a stressful situation in the metabolism, such as glucose, cortisol try to lower the glucose metabolism and increase glucose concentration. When we have a trauma, cortisol try to start to degrade protein in the muscle. This is not good, but we need degrade the protein in the muscle and mobilize the amino acid to provide needed amino acid for the process of wound healing. Therefore, for the muscle, it is not good, but for trauma, for those traumatized cells, it is needed. And you can see that this show the adrenal corticosterone concentration. By the way, let me tell you that in the rodent, corticosterone is the main glucocorticoid that is released. And as you can see, immediately after the stressful situation, the concentration of cortisol will increase and corticosterone will increase and reach the highest values in some minutes. This shows how much it is strong to protect the body against the stress. But you should know that this should be short term, not long term. Let me to review one metabolic action advantage of cortisol during the acute phase of one stress. Imagine one elderly person sleep on ice and the hip, one bones are being broke or dislocated. The hip is dislocated. You know, in this stressful situation, firstly, cortisol will increase immediately. And this cortisol try to decrease the insulin concentration. On the other hand, glucagon will increase. What is the meaning of this? This means that glucose concentration of blood is increasing because insulin is low and glucagon is high. On the other hand, because of this stress, the medulla is also being stimulated. Therefore, sympathetic nervous system and medulla will be activated, and this increases the norepinephrine and epinephrine in the blood. You remember, I told you before that cortisol stimulates and sensitize the vascular bed to epinephrine effect. Therefore, the blood pressure will be controlled and controlled better because of the presence of cortisol and epinephrine. On the other hand, insulin was decreased, therefore glucose is increasing. On the liver, glucose production by glucogenolysis will be stimulated. Gluconeogenesis will be stimulated. Conversion of amino acid and conversion of fatty acid into glucose will be increased. In the skeletal muscle, proteolysis will increase. This is not good, but here, because of the situation, it is not very bad. And amino acid will be mobilized to the blood to protect the injured tissue. On the other hand, protein synthesis in the muscle will be inhibited. Glucose production will be increased by the muscle. Glucose usage by the muscle will be decreased. In fact, cortisol is telling the body, please do not use the glucose. We need glucose to be high because we have in a stressful situation, and do not allow the glucose to decrease. The same effect is also seen in the adipose tissue. Adipose lipolysis will increase, and this provides energy source other than glucose for the body. But these effect was all beneficial in the acute phase. But if the stress continue, now the bad side of cortisol, bad effect of cortisol will also appear. You see that, for example, a person with Cushing disease, that for a long time cortisol is high. In this situation, because of the diabetogenic effect of cortisol that I told you, gradually then cortisol level will increase. Gradually then insulin level will increase. And the ratio of insulin to glucagon this time will be in favor of insulin. On the other hand, the release of epinephrine will be exhausted and is decreased. On the other hand, the muscle's proteolysis is continuous and uptake of glucose by the muscle is decreased. This causes the muscle to atrophy. Liver hepatic glycogen synthesis will increase. Liver try to uptake the extra glucose and convert it into glycogen. Appetite will increase. Adipose tissue, you can see, there is not enough lipolysis because the body do not need energy from the lipids, and this causes the lipolysis to decrease, synthesis of triglyceride to increase, and this increase the fat, adipose tissue fat content. What is this? What is the general effect of this? We have a situation of atrophied muscles, increased adipose tissue, and this regulated ratio of insulin, ratio of glucose uptake and glucose usage, and all these effects will provide the picture that we know about the Cushing. Cortisol also have a direct effect on the cardiovascular system. Normally, it has a permissive function for the catecholamine. I told you that it provides and it stimulates the expression of catecholamine receptor in the vessel. And therefore, without cortisol, we have problem with the control of blood pressure. But this should be in normal physiological. On the erythropoietin synthesis, it stimulates the erythropoietin synthesis, therefore stimulate the RBC, red blood cell production. Cortisol is also known best for its effect on inflammation. In fact, cortisol is able to prevent all aspects of inflammation, stabilizing lysosomal membrane, decreasing permeability of capillary, decreasing migration of white blood cell, suppress immune cells, lower interleukins, lower fever, block inflammatory factor, increasing healing, inhibit phospholipase A2. You can imagine what I'm going to say. All aspects of inflammation will be stopped by cortisol. And this is a normal physiological function to control the inflammatory response. You know that inflammation is not a bad factor for body unless in the situation that the inflammation is uncontrolled. And the way that body is able to control inflammation is by cortisol. And for this reason and for this effect, you know that the best drugs ever for combating inflammation are those drugs that mimic the function of the cortisol. Cortisol also inhibits the immune system. It blocks inflammatory response and allergic reaction, decreased number of T cells, decreased lymphocyte. Lymphoid tissue will be atrophied, and but you should know that antibody production by beta cell is not impaired. This was the main effect of cortisol. And you know that in the stressful situation, that for example, I have inflammation, this will help to control the inflammation. What about the effect of other tissue? For example, the effect on the reproductive system. Normal cortisol concentration is needed for normal function of reproductive system. Either increased cortisol or decreased cortisol is impairing the function of the reproductive system. On the bone and muscles, it has negative effect because it decreases the protein synthesis in them. It increases protein degradation and release of amino acids. Therefore, in short term, it may not be dangerous for the muscle and bone, but in long term, it will eventually negatively affect them. On the connective tissue, cortisol inhibits fibroblast proliferation and also collagen formation. What about this? Therefore, I can say that elevated cortisol is not good for the skin because it impairs the collagen synthesis, and connective tissue support for the capillary will be lost. For this reason, those who are in high concentration of cortisol, for example, Cushing disease or stressful or chronically stressed persons, sometimes their skin is not protecting the capillaries. On the kidney, cortisol increases GFR inhibits secretion and action of antidiuretic hormone, and also it has, as I told you, it has some mineralocorticoid effect. On the muscle, I told you several times that it inhibits the protein production in the muscle. Therefore, in high concentration, it may weaken the muscle and cause pain. And on the GI system, it has the similar effect. Normal concentration is needed, but high concentration is negative for it. It has some psychological effect on the brain. It has negative effect on fetal development. And in the fetal development, just in one period of time, near the term, near the end of pregnancy, the cortisol has a very important, this time positive effect that allow the respiratory system to be maturated, and also the cardiovascular system to be maturated, and make the baby ready for to have a life without the support of mother. Therefore, the cortisol in that period of time is very important and is a supportive factor. I reviewed the functions of cortisols, and I ask you about these functions in your exam. What about the regulation? I told you about the regulation, that we have an axis, and this axis is controlled by negative feedback, as I told you. And the main hormone that is released in this system is ACTH. ACTH almost stimulates all aspects of cortisol synthesis, release. It has some immediate effects, such as increasing the enzymes, proteins, subsequent effect, and long-term effect. For example, in long-term, it increases the size and complexity and the number of this adrenal cortex cells. And this is also true in the other direction. If we remove the ACTH from the body, gradually the adrenal cortex will be atrophied because it do not receive such a stimulus. In the cortisol control, also we have a circadian rhythm. And you know that circadian rhythm for cortisol is that in the morning time it will be highest, and in the evening time it go down to its lowest function. In that session that I told you about circadian rhythm, I told you that how much this circadian rhythm is important for us. This was all about the fasciculatal layer and the cortisol.